Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to share a conversation that I had with Carey Nieuwhof on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. Carey and I, we dug into business growth, leadership, and some of the key lessons that I learned along the way building two multi-million-dollar real estate businesses. It was a real honor to be on the platform, as Carey is one of the most respected voices in leadership today. I think you're going to get a lot of value from it. So let's jump in.
Mark, I've been looking forward to this day for a long time. Finally, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Carey.
Yeah. So very few people I know are more motivated than you are. I got a pretty wide circle, and, we lived in the same community for many years, got to know each other quite well. And you are so focused on follow through, get results, and it's amazing. And you're barely past 40? Is that right?
Yeah, 42 now. My wife likes
42.
to let me know that I'm a whole year older than her, even though it was 3 months. I'm December, she's March. Yeah.
But on the calendar, that's how it works out. I would like to go back to sort of your origin story in leadership, because like a lot of people, you did not think that you would be doing real estate and wealth management and investing, in real estate for your life. You had a very different plan for your life, but what happened? How did that unfold?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm playing hockey, and so my dad would go out to the barn and he would
Classic Canadian story, dude.
Yeah, north of Toronto, right? You got to play hockey. And
was that Innisfil, by the way? Just for the locals?
A little town called Cookstown, so about an hour north of Toronto. And my dad would flood the rink, and I'd go out every night and I would practice shooting. And, I wasn't always the most skilled guy, but I just worked really hard and worked my way up through the ranks and played junior. And then I played a couple seasons over in Sweden, and I finished up down in the Central League in the US and in Texas. And so it was a couple of leagues below the NHL. So I was never at that top there. But I walked in one day, I was recently married. I walked in and the coach called me aside and said, "Hey, Mark, we put you on waivers. And so here's a couple of plane tickets back for you and your wife. And it's actually flying out in a few hours. So you're going to need to kind of hustle." I went in the change room and my stuff was in a garbage bag. So picked up that garbage bag of my equipment, went back, told Joanna, and we flew back. And we actually stayed at her parents' house for the short while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And Joanna said to me one day, she said, "Mark, you don't have to keep playing hockey if you don't want it." I was like, "Yeah, I don't want it." It was like these blinders, these blindfolds fell off. And I was like, "I want to get into real estate." I always loved real estate investing. I thought, what better way to learn about real estate investing than to become an agent? And then 6 months later, had my license, jumped in. And Carey, you probably know this about me, but I'm more of an inward. I'm not a big...
Yeah, you are actually quite... Like, you have a big public persona. Anybody who lives north of Toronto, your signs are everywhere. But you are a quiet guy, like you really are.
Yeah. And so this was something that getting out and talking to people, I was like super uncomfortable with. But we had to put food on the table. And we got to a point where we were $10,000 in credit card debt when I started back in 2007. And I was motivated to put food on the table. So I just got out and spoke to thousands and thousands of people. And I became better at it just by sheer volume. And so we ended up pushing through that early startup stage. And actually, there's a book that I picked up, Think and Grow Rich. And that was about 6 months in. And in there, it said, get very clear on what your goals are, get a goal card. And so I did that. And we did 38 sales that first full year after that 6 month, we'll say, dry spell. And then we hired somebody and we scaled up. And we ended up doing the following year, we did 100 sales, and then we did 160, and we scaled up doing 1,000 sales while I was selling 150 homes personally, leading the team doing 1,000. And then we started hitting this ceiling, and I realized that I needed to transition from selling into being that CEO role. And then that led me down kind of that next stage in the journey, which, I'm sure we'll get to here, but that's that early stage.
There was so much. I'm going to rewind this a little bit and break it down. So the one thing, being put on waivers, let's talk about that. Getting cut. We have leaders listening who've been fired. That's basically what it was, right? It's like, don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
That's devastating for a lot of people. And it's often arresting. There are people who don't recover from that. They never get their confidence. They're like, ooh, it's a wound that never heals. I'd love you, if you don't mind, taking us back to what that felt like, seeing your stuff in a garbage bag, getting on a plane, flying back to Toronto. What were you feeling like emotionally when that happened?
Yeah, it was embarrassing when that happened, right? It was your whole life. You're going towards something, and you're in this league, and you got to walk in to the change room. You have all the guys in the change room, and they see you picking your garbage bag up, and you're saying your goodbyes. But I think looking back in retrospect at that, what ended up happening was soon after I had the door opened up. Although that one door closed, another one opened up, and my life completely changed for the better. And I realized looking back on this now, like hockey was not, that's not an ideal lifestyle. I mean, when you see the guys in the NHL and you're like, oh, they're making all these millions of dollars, like, believe me, they earn every dollar. Just to get there is hard, but the lifestyle is tough. I mean, your knees get hurt, over time. And so the door opened up. And so the reality that I look back at now is the fact that no matter what happens, there's two stories you can tell yourself. You can tell yourself a victim story, or you can tell yourself a victor story. And so this is one of the biggest things that I've seen with successful people, and through all the different pivots that I had to make through the years, is that when something happens, you really look at, what can I take from this? And what's we'll say the key insights or the key lessons that I can learn from this, and that another door is going to open up. I mean, you have two people, and Carey, you know the story of the two sons that were grown up by a drunk father. The father beat them, and one grew up to be, a drunk the same. And an interviewer asked them why they were a drunk, and they're like, "Well, if you knew my father, you would be that way too." And then you have the other son that grew up to be wildly successful, great father, great husband, great entrepreneur, and he used that same reason of the father being a drunk and beating them as to why he was so successful. And so the cup, you can have a cup that's half full or half empty, and it's the same exact thing. You just see two different stories, and whatever you tell yourself in those emotional downfalls is how you act and respond. And I think that is the biggest differentiating factor from the uber successful to the ones that fail.
And so you kind of had that mindset even on the flight home. Like, I'm sure, you were licking your wounds for a minute or two, but you were quickly pivoting into, okay, what opportunity does this provide for me
Yeah,
and us?
it wasn't an overnight thing. Like, I was looking
Yeah.
for a number of months for another team, and it was only in a moment that Joanna made that suggestion. So I think looking back in retrospect, I know it's like I have this philosophy, this whole side of it that I think looking back on it now, there was the challenge of going through it, but it was more of a must. What I mean by that is that the moment that I got caught, there was embarrassment. And then I had to go through this process of challenge. And then it got to a point where it was a must that I had to put food on the table because I was living at her parents' house, and that was not okay. Like, I was embarrassed by living there. So I think that any sort of transition that you go through, if you can put yourself where your back is up against the wall, and you make it a must rather than, oh, I'll get around to it when I can. I think that is probably one of the biggest, we'll say, drivers in anybody going through a challenging period. You put your back up against the wall and you're forced to do it.
You're around 25 at this point, are you?
Yeah,
20,
early 20s. So I was
early
around
20s.
24. Yeah.
24.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the thing for people who don't know, I mean, hockey is all consuming in Canada or other nations where they play hockey, where this is literally a 20-year dream from the time you're 4 years old. It's your whole conscious life, and it's yanked out from under you. Okay. Let's talk about the switch, the pivot to real estate, because, I have a sister who's in real estate, shout out to Jen. She's awesome at what she does. And she's been very successful at it. You've been very successful at it. For leaders, I mean, Mark, you became the #1 real estate agent in Canada, and your firm #1 in Canada. And that's not even in a major city. That's an hour north of a major city. So, I mean, that says something. But my understanding is in the industry of real estate, it's a relatively low bar to enter. If I
Mm.
decide I want to get into real estate, I can probably be licensed with what? Within 6 months
6
or
months.
so?
You got
6
it.
months.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go to school. You don't need a degree, bar of entry. And I've heard, you can correct me, but like 80% of real
Yeah.
estate agents end up selling 1 or 2 houses a year. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that about
About
right?
half of them on the board, I'm saying the Toronto Real Estate Board, there's over 70,000, won't even sell a property. And
Wow.
so there's a lot of them that have their license, or maybe they sell one after that 50 percentile. And so there's a lot of agents that are in the business for maybe just in case, but there's very few that actually do it full time. There's about an 87% failure rate within a 5-year time span in that business. And so
And by failure rate, how do you define that?
they're out.
What does that mean?
They're out of
They're
the
out. You
business.
mean they're like,
Yeah.
I got my license, now I'm done.
Yeah, that's right.
So only 13% make it. And of the people who make it, a tiny percentage actually sell homes enough to make it, this is my full-time job.
Yeah, it's a little more extreme than the Pareto principle, where you
Yeah.
get like pretty much 20% of the realtors that are doing 80% of the business, and so it's a little
It's
bit
kind of
more
more like
extreme.
95-5 or
It's
90-10.
more like 90-10, right? Like
Yeah.
they're the top agents and the top teams are doing more, and so I mean it's harder today for an individual agent versus a team that operates as a business to be
Mm.
able to execute, because there's just so many things you need to do, right, when it comes down to marketing properties.
I remember, because we've been part of the same community for years, living in the same area. But before we became friends, I remember seeing your signs. And I don't know what it was, Mark, but there was something that told me, even back in 2007 when you started, I've never told you this before. I thought, that guy's going to be successful. And I don't know what it was, whether it was the branding. Your branding's come a long way.
Mhm.
What were some of the initial decisions you made when you got into real estate, so you didn't become part of the 90% who basically couldn't sell a house, didn't sell many houses, and didn't end up going into greater credit card debt, which was a real possibility? What were some of those initial decisions that you and Joanna, your wife, made to help you sell 38 homes in your first year?
Yeah. Well, first it was a must. We burned the ships. Like, I didn't have a part-time job. Joanna was doing the staging and the marketing.
Mm.
And so we had to be successful. So I think having a strong desire is the first, we'll say, decision to burn the ships. But then after that, it was, for me, it was always going full out. And that was actually our slogan,
Mm.
full out for you. Jordan's like, you're always going full out in hockey, full out in business. We should be full out for you. So we got very clear what our brand
Was
was
that
gonna
early
be
on?
around.
That was your
Yeah.
branding?
Yeah, I
Really?
remember.
Full out for you. I thought that
Yeah.
was more recent. Okay.
Yeah. No, I remember we were in the townhome. There was the blue tile, 1,100 square foot, our first property. And Joanna's like, we had that conversation in the kitchen. And so I think getting clear, we'll say, what your differentiating factor is early on, it was definitely pivotal. And then, we wanted to really create the best experience out there for clients. And so that's something that we never cut corners on any of the marketing, the branding, how we service. I mean, I don't know if you recall, but back in the day, we used to have our feature books or feature sheets. When a buyer would come into a listed home,
Mhm.
they would get to leave something of value so they remember the property. We call them feature books. Well, we were one of the first anyways, at least in our market that I can recall, that would actually have a CD of the slideshow in the back of the book that we pasted in the back. And now everything is online, and there's a website URL
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
whatnot. But that was one of those cutting edge kind of marketing tactics that we did, but we were always thinking ahead. And so that helped us get a good enough head start. And then I just took massive action. Like, I was out in snow blizzards, knocking on doors. I was cold calling. And then, but I'd say from a decision standpoint, Carey, where it really turned for us is when I was selling 38 homes a year. Joanna was doing the staging, and she was doing the photography, and we decided to hire somebody. And this is
Mm.
where I know a lot of the listeners out there is like, I'm an independent contractor. I'm doing everything on my own. And it's very scary. And so we decided we're going to bring somebody on. We said, okay, just for 30 hours a week. And we did that, and she never worked less than 40 hours. And we scaled up after that year from 38 maxing out, 38 sales to 100 sales that next year. And so that's where I really learned the value on hiring really strong people, and that it's an investment, it's not a cost.
So going a little bit deeper, you mentioned you're an introvert, and we've been to your house many times. You've been to our house many times. And yeah, I buy that, Mark. Like, you have a really good way with people, but when you probably refuel by being alone.
Yeah.
How did you push yourself? And you're right. I mean, if you're going to sell real estate in Canada, that's going to mean some lousy weather. That's going to mean minus 20-degree days. It's going to mean blizzards. It's going to mean heat waves in the summer, all of that. How did you push yourself through all those boundaries to go literally knock on, how many doors would you have knocked on that first year?
Yeah, well, there was thousands through my career, but for me, it was, I knew that if I had 100 conversations, whether it was through cold calling or door knocking, that I could book 2 appointments, and it was a numbers game for me.
So 2%,
Yeah,
literally.
it was like, it's not if, it's when, and so that was helpful because I knew it wasn't a personal thing. It was a numbers game, and then as time went on, I started improving and getting better at it. And then I got to the point where I had people calling where I didn't need to do that.
Mm.
But I'd say what pushed me was, first, it was a must. I had to put food on the table. And then after that, it was like being the top in the office. And then it was being the
Mhm.
top in all of Roll of Page, which is 20,000 agents. And then being the top in all Canada out of all teams and all brokerages. That was a driver. And then after that, it was like, okay, I want to build a company that I can be really proud of, where all of our team members is big enough where all of our team members can hit what their motivators are and what their big goals are. And so that was really cool. And then after that, it was like, okay, I want to build an investment firm that investors can hit their goals. And then it was like, okay, let's pull in the resident experience as well. So for me, the driver changed through the years. And so initially it
Mm.
was like that fear of failure. And I still think in the back of my mind that's still there. But the motivator getting clear and realizing that it changes over time, and just really getting clear what that was, and then tying a specific number to what that motivator is so that I know if I hit it or not. That was a really big part. And of course, I love growth and I love curiosity. And yeah, these conversations, Carey, you and I, we've had lots of business conversations through the years as well. Like, I love it. I
Mhm.
love it. And so
Mhm.
for me, like, this is fun. And when you get to improve and get better, it's we'll just say uh, it's a lot more rewarding the better you get at something, and more fun.
If you had to advise someone, and it's surprising, I don't know whether you know this or not, a lot of people don't, but many preachers are introverted, believe it or not. The people on stage with the microphone
Yeah.
are pretty quiet. So they might retreat to a green room. They might say, I would never go door to door, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
What would you say? What advice would you have for people who are just maybe naturally a little more reserved in terms of embracing the public aspect of the role?
Yeah. First, I think it's really important to figure out why you're doing the thing that you're doing.
Hmm.
And so that motivator, I feel, is really important, because if you don't make it a must, or if it's not important enough, then you won't put yourself through we'll say the uncomfortness, or
Hmm.
the lack of comfortability side of
Yeah.
it. You're not going to push yourself through that if it's not a strong enough why. I mean, so getting clear on the reason that you are doing it, and then also understanding that everything that you start at the beginning it's in general, unless you're naturally inclined, it's hard at the beginning. But like any muscle, you will get better. And so getting out in front of people, if that's a fear, the best thing that I found to do it is to go and attack it. Because right on the other side of fear is like there's peace on the other side. And so it's interesting, if you let that continue to like hang out there, that fear side, if you don't attack it, it's always there and it grows. Versus like Will Smith said, is that his whole approach is he fears fear. And so he attacks it anytime it comes up in him, and he
Wow.
goes after it. And I found that for me, it's like the faster I can go after that fear, then it subsides and it drifts and it leaves. But having a clear why as to why you're doing it should give you enough, we'll say, fuel to be able to just get started. And then once you get started, then it's just a matter of your consistency and reminding yourself why you're doing it.
I want to talk about branding. you're $10,000 in debt. And I think that's probably why when I saw those signs, and I remember it was around the time we were launching Connexus that you launched, became just at that time, you were a real estate agent. That's it. Like you didn't own a brokerage, you worked for another company. But I remember seeing your signs and thinking, those are really well branded. They don't look like the generic sign that's out there. When you're $10,000 in debt and you're fighting to put groceries on the table and living with your in-laws, why did you decide to make an investment when you could have just not printed the CDs, not gone for the high-end thing? Why did you do that? And then how did you do that?
Yeah. So at the beginning, when we didn't have a lot, it was pretty much get business however you can to be able to generate income to first get food on the table. Like, let's stop the bleeding here. So that's where friends, family, door knocking, all the stuff that doesn't cost a lot. But then as we started getting some more, we'll say dollars in, where we didn't need to spend it on living. Of course, we weren't taking lavish vacations around that time.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
what we found was really important is that whenever we had a listing, we had the opportunity, we maximized that as much as possible. And so when it came down to advertising, we realized that simple was better. So anytime we were trying to be cute with our messaging, it never stuck. So just very simple and consistent. And so the consistency with the marketing was like that became extremely important. And as we started making more, we would advertise a little bit more, but we were always consistent. So we saw some agents come into the market and they do these full page, one page spread, and they would do that for 1 or 2 weeks. Whereas with us, we started small, but we were consistent every week we were there. And then it slowly grew where we were starting to fund it ourselves through our profits. But I think that's as we'll say anybody that starts something, if you start small and you can start with very low investment, you will become very efficient in whatever it is that you're doing. And so I think, when it comes down to building a church, for example, I know a lot of your listeners, are church leaders. It's like just start with what you have, maximize that. And as you start getting more and more of a following, I think that's where you can start leveraging some of these other costs. I think if going right to those expensive, you haven't built up the muscle, I believe, enough. Whereas if you're doing maybe the lower costs, or say the face to face on a more regular basis, I think that's how you start in order to build enough muscle. So as you start to scale up, you have those foundational, we'll say, skill sets.
Drop a couple bucks on a Facebook or Google ad before you drop $10,000
Yeah,
on a billboard.
Fire
right?
bullet. You got
Fire
it.
bullet. Yeah. So and again, if you don't want to talk about this, we can cut this out. But I remember there was a couple years ago, and you're in both countries now. So just you're in the U.S. and in Canada. You have residences in Naples and also in north of Toronto. But for your Canadian presence, anybody north of Toronto, you see Faris signs everywhere. It's kind of like Mark Spain in Atlanta or other well-known real estate agents in the U.S. who are just dominant. Your signs are everywhere. But I remember you were saying there was a change in direction in the ad, and the billboard you liked the least performed the most. Do you remember that conversation or that pivot?
Well, for us, there was we started trying to get cute. We started listening to other quote unquote marketing specialists where it's like more lifestyle. And so we removed the face and we got
because your face is on all the billboards. Yeah.
And so we ended up starting to get feedback from people that like, are you selling the business? We don't see you around anymore. And it was interesting. We realized that the more cute we got, where marketing people would love the ads, but everyday people, they were so loud out there. The simplicity like was not as strong as just free home evaluation. Like Mark Spain is guaranteed offer. An interesting fact, actually, with Mark Spain, their president and CEO, he's actually now my business partner on Faris Capital. So he transitioned. I'm working with him now. So they're just a great company, but they focus on the US. And so, but the point there is that this simple approach and consistency is something that we went back to the face, and people they saw, oh, okay, Mark's back. But it was interesting that the data's got to be able to tell you that, and feedback in the market. And we've tried multiple different things in the past, but we found simplicity and consistency is the key to getting through all the loud noise. I mean, people are bombarded now with messaging, and so you got to be consistent and keep it simple in order to break
You're
through.
right. There's fewer words on your billboards. There, I think what's the one you guys are running now? It's like the sign
It's
you've been
simple.
looking for.
Just free home evaluation. Just
Free home evaluation.
it's simple, it's boring, yet it offers something, and there's a clear message to it. And so we just keep it simple, and that's been our approach.
You have had to go through several iterations as a leader, from the salesperson banging on the door, and your wife Joanna is amazing. And
I agree.
she was your marketing.
Yeah.
She did the staging and everything. Actually, let me back up. Before I ask you this, let me ask you this. What were some other early things? As soon as you had the money to reinvest, you elevated the game in terms of the leaflet that you would leave at a house. So it wasn't just photocopied at some office. It was full color, had a CD in it at the time.
Yeah.
I think you guys invested more in staging than the average realtor. Can you explain that, and maybe a couple of other differentiators that you selected early on to make your brand stand out?
So, Carey, when we met and we started talking. Actually, it was about entrepreneurship and business growth. And you had actually recommended this book if you're listening, it's Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. And in the book, he talks about having 3 brand promises. And so I went down this whole journey of figuring out what our brand promises are. And so for us, as professional, loving realtors, so highly trained and professional. The next is exceptional marketing, making sure that we're marketing all of our properties really well. So the staging is tight, the photos and video are amazing, and everything is tight. And then the best experience. And we back that up with a guarantee, so they can cancel at any time with us. And so those 3 brand promises, when it comes down to investment for us, we're always looking at how can we spend money on each of those brand promises. And if you think of a brand promise as we'll call it an iceberg. And so the top of the iceberg is the actual brand promise, but underneath is all the infrastructure, the investment, the capital, the training, the time allocation, the priorities to be able to support it. And so whenever we were spending money, we would look at that and say, okay, we want to spend here to make sure that we're delivering on these main 3 brand promises.
Okay, so why staging? Why was that important? And can you explain staging?
Yeah.
I mean, I do have family in real estate. We know you guys. I've bought and sold one house in my life, so I mean, I'm not exactly an expert, Mark.
Yeah.
What's staging?
So staging is we'll say the journey of bringing a home from a everyday living home to we'll say a property that is showcased to appeal to a buyer and to emotionally hook them in. So that means, if we were to drill it down, making sure that you have no clutter around, making sure that the room flows. And when it comes to the furniture, you have the right art, the right decor, and you don't have anything on your counters at a very simple essence. And so that's where we actually bring in a stager, and we help the client, the seller, be able to prepare their home. So when a buyer walks through, they can see it not as the owner's home, but as their future potential home. And so when that's done, we bring in our photo video team, and we have everybody's in house right now. We have a full staging team, photo video team, and couriers and all the rest. And so once our photo video team comes in, they showcase the home. We do aerial, photo and video, and then twilights as well. So it kind of shows the sun going down. And then, so if that happens on the Wednesday, we have overnight editors now that can actually deliver high quality feature books on Thursday evening, because our data and our surveys that we were getting were that when a property went on the market, let's just say Friday morning, they want their feature books all there ready to go. So if a buyer books a showing, they have a giveaway. And so we had to figure out with overnight editors on how to take photos and video on Wednesday and be able to have it printed and shipped to the client by Thursday evening, that very next day. So when they woke up in that morning on Friday, they had them. And so it was a whole journey, Carey, because it was like 2 to 3 weeks after it went on the market, we deliver these feature books. It's like that, it's already sold by then. Right. And so that's the process. And for us, we try to take everything in-house as much as possible. We have our own couriers and drivers. And so that was a really big part of the success, on the real estate brokerage side of things.
Yeah. And I remember when you were bringing people in-house, because you used independent contractors for a long time, independent, videographers and photographers and everything. And that was a big move for you guys. What is the advantage? And I'm thinking about, churches that are 1,500 to 3,000. They're in that in-between point of part-time to full-time, outsourcing versus bringing in, maybe even up to, $5 million in budget. What have been the advantages to having in-house people to handle all that?
Yeah. Well, the first and foremost is the culture of the team members that you have in-house. That was one of our biggest things. Like, we couldn't control the client experience. And so when we hire people, we have our core values that we filter people through, and we have our process and how we communicate as well. So one person needs to talk to the next person, and everybody needs to be informed so that there's no, we'll say, telephone tag in the game, right? And so the culture in regards to the people, I think that's first and foremost. And then the ability to be able to track and to improve the client experience. Like, for example, when we transitioned from a brokerage where we were with Roll LePage, it's kind of like a Remax in Canada. They were taking all of our initial calls and then they would transfer the call to us. Well, we can control that experience and how quick they picked up that phone. So when we brought that in-house and we had our own reception team, now we track that so that 99.5% of the time we pick it up live. And so that's
amazing. Okay. So in an age of AI and voicemail, I just want to pause on that. When I call 1-800 whatever, a real human being picks up the phone.
That's right.
95% of the time.
I'm hardcore on that. And here's the reason, because when I was calling around, when I was initially calling brokerages on who I was going to work with back in 2007, I had a few not great experiences. And one of them I'd called and I got the runaround. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm experiencing this, probably my clients are going to experience it as well. So I didn't interview them. Now, that would have been millions of dollars to that brokerage if I went there, because I liked the broker when I met him later. And so I thought to myself, oh my goodness, if it's not a great experience within that first call, and that's where for any of the church leaders, that first call when they pick up, that to me, I tell we call them our connection team, their receptionists. I tell them, you're one of the most important people in the whole company, because you're that first experience. And so how well that goes, it sets the tone.
See, this is fast. This is taking me back to the launch of Connexus. And I remember, we're bootstrapping it. We don't have money, the whole deal. And one of the decisions I made is, so first of all, that was in 2007. This is 2025. People would say, nobody talks on the phone anymore. Gen Z has phone anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. But I was calling around to help somebody with a property that they're vacating, just a family member. And I had to call removal companies to take some stuff away that we're not going to use. I wanted to talk to a real person. I was chatting with a chatbot last night online. The chatbot was great, but the chatbot lied. And when I got the real person, they're like, yeah, we don't really do that. I call, sometimes I call really small businesses and like Joe's Garage, and you get like, welcome to Joe's Garage with some nice music. Somebody will be with you in a minute. I'm like, Joe, pick up the phone, dude. Like, get someone to pick up the phone. So when we were starting Connexus all those years ago, I was like, we need someone at the front desk, on reception, answering the phone live.
Yeah.
And I remember getting so much pushback for that 18 years ago because people thought it was antiquated. If I was starting again today and I had a bricks and mortar business, 100%, I would be like, we're going to differentiate ourselves by having a live human picking up the phone. Do you want to go through, you and I've talked about that. I want you to break down that decision and why it matters, because so many of us, we are in the customer service business one way or the other. Why does that matter in an age of AI?
Well, first off, that's my own experience. When I call any sort of business, I'm calling the bank. I'm just like 000. And if they don't say that, I'm
me too.
And so,
Yeah.
our clients are more affluent clients. And so in general, they want to have a great experience when you call and you want to speak to somebody. And that's been for my own, that's what I want. And so if I call a company and I don't get somebody live, that to me is like strike one. But strike two is if I speak to somebody, the experience needs to be a wow. Like if they're super friendly, it makes that business stand out in a real big way. And so this is where for us it came down to if we miss one time, that can be tens of thousands of dollars that we could lose out on. And so not only that, it wrecks our brand as well because if people make a decision, they have a bad first experience. So here's another example. So with our investment properties, when we go buy these apartment buildings, that's the other side of the business is Faris Capital Partners. We go in and we buy these 100-unit apartment buildings. We partner with investors and we buy in the Southeast market. So Atlanta, Charleston, Tampa. And so the number one thing we do when we take over a building, it seems so simple, yet it's such a big, drastic change, is that when we buy the properties, we change the property manager out to somebody friendly.
Like a nice human being. Is that what you're
You would be
saying?
shocked, Carey, just shocked. Just by transitioning to somebody that is super friendly, that is professional, that has a genuine love of people. We give them the mission statement of the community, the core values. We make sure they're filtered through. That is the number one thing. And so when we look for buildings, we look for Google reviews from the property management team coming in like three out of five. We're like, oh, this is low hanging fruit. This is beautiful. Just by changing to somebody that's friendly, that has a genuine love of people, because people are coming in, new residents. If they have a bad experience with that property manager, Carey, like you, I'm not going to live here. They're going to be the one
Yeah.
looking after me. And now we're talking about hundreds of units. These are tens of millions of dollars building. And just think about the loss that they're having. And so now tying it to all businesses, all churches, all community, anything where there's anybody is coming in and there needs to be an experience delivered, that first step is that
Mhm.
first impression. People make a decision if they like you or not within the first 7 seconds. And I know Daniel Pink talks about like, very strong endings, but if you don't make it a wow at the beginning, you won't get a shot to serve them.
Hmm. I've said this to Chick-fil-A executives ad infinitum, but I love their chicken sandwich, waffle fries for the win, the whole deal. I think what they really export and what they really do, and I've talked to the Cathys about this, it's like you guys know how to train 17-year-olds to be amazing customer service people. I got to ask you, you do the same thing. So, but in a different field entirely.
Yeah.
How do you hire for that? How do you select for that? Can you turn a negative people person into a positive people person, or does the DNA have to be there? Can you break that down a little bit, Mark?
I have Darren Hardy. You probably,
Mhm.
for the listeners out there, he's probably the modern. Well, he's like the modern day Napoleon Hill, and just a real genius when it comes down to marketing and business growth and overall success. So he shared the story where he went to the Marriott and he was going to meet the president of the Marriott the next day. So he checked in. The bellman greeted him. He was super friendly. He went to the front desk. The lady welcomed him. She was super friendly. Went up, ordered room service. Room service came up. They were super friendly. The next day, he meets the president and says, "How on earth do you train everybody to be so friendly? I want to know. How do you do it?" He's like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Well, everybody I've met so far has been super friendly. It's amazing. I want to know. Tell me." He thinks about it for a second. He goes, He's like, "We don't train people to be friendly. We hire friendly people." And Darren's like, "Oh, man." So, for us, through the years, I've tried changing people and I've gone down that route. But for us, I don't want to take that bet anymore. So our filter is very strong. If they don't have a genuine love of people, as in when I meet them, if I'm not feeling the love immediate from them, they're not a fit. And they'll probably be a fit somewhere else, but just not with us. And so for us, there's three things that we look for. Number one is a genuine love of people. Number two, they have a willingness to work hard. And number three, they have a willingness to learn. And so if they have those three things, they have all the ingredients to be a massive success. because we have the rollout plan. Like we've documented, here's how you go on a listing, here's how you go on on the buyer side, here's how we communicate. And so one of the challenges I found from some people where that have come on, they're intelligent, like super educated and just wicked smart. But it'll say, okay, go and learn this. And they'll come back and they're like, well, I kind of tweaked this a little. They spend all the time trying to tweak instead of just learning it and executing. I'm like, please don't, just go. And so learn. And once you learn, I think that the willingness to learn and be humble enough and just to do what's said, I think it's of untold importance when you hire people on. And that's not something you can train.
What difference does having a live person? I know we're spending a lot of time on answering the phone, but I think there's a parable here, a lesson here. I've read some of the data, and you'll have it more at top of mind than I do. But if I call you and I get a response within the first 60 seconds or so, you're far more likely to make the sale. If it's 10 minutes, the odds of you making a sale drop. If it's an hour or the next day, by the time the next day hits, you're probably not making the sale. Do you want to talk a little bit about, just drill down one more time on the live receptionist going, Faris team, Carey speaking. Why is that still important, and what difference does it make?
Yeah. So there's two parts to this, Carey. First is when there's an email online lead that comes in. So there's an inquiry. For us, it's 5 minutes. The average response time in real estate is actually 16 hours response time. So if you're within 5 minutes, you're way ahead of the game. And so people are caught in that. So when they reach out and they fill out a form, they're mentally in that state. If you wait longer than 5 minutes, they're probably getting, the kids are screaming in the background, they get distracted, and then they mentally move on.
Well, and they might be emailing 5 different firms
100%.
at the same time, right?
100%.
Cut, paste, send.
So that's really important. And just by the way, when you reach out, you're creating an experience of your personal brand. So you imprint. So that's really important, the speed in regards to response for online leads. But for people that are actually calling in, that you pick up live, it's like so that they're not on wait. And for the 0.5% of the people that are they're put on hold when we're in between, we actually have a full out song that we created. We're gonna go full every. And so I'm not a great singer here, Carey, but actually Josh sang it for us.
Your cousin.
Faris, yeah. And so the point there is that we really wanted to curate the experience from that very first connection all the way through. And so what we've done, Carey, is we've mapped out every touch point from that first entry call and how we can make that a wow to we'll say the inside sales rep that speaks with them, to the agent that shows up with a gift bag with coffee mugs there that's branded, to the presentation, to the wow with the staging. We're bringing so every step along the way, we try and add a little bit of a wow to it that's unexpected. And by doing that, we found the likelihood that they're going to refer a friends and family member go up drastically. But the first call, that needs to be looked at. And for us, we look at that as the first step in a number of steps that we need to make it a wow as much as possible. Because if we don't get it right at the first, that I would say is probably one of the most important, then we may not get second or third shot to be able to experience how good we are at it.
So any thoughts on wow moments? I think church leaders and business leaders are always trying to experience it. And I want to give you a little example from our company. So, when this is over, I've already got it on my desk. I'm going to send you a thank you card that's handwritten. And then we've always given out different gifts. We've given out Roots stuff, which is classic Canadian, socks, hoodies, that kind of stuff. Lately, we pivoted to luggage tags that are monogrammed. So I'm ruining this. Okay, you're probably going to get, your initials monogrammed on a luggage tag.
Cool.
And it's not the most expensive gift in the world, but it's thoughtful and it's personalized and it's nicely packaged and everything. And Mark, I got to tell you, the number of people who are like world-class people that I have on this podcast who will text me or DM me and go, I can't believe you got me a luggage tag. Like I just, mine just died and I needed a new one. And that was so thoughtful. Thank you so much for your note and the luggage tag. And I'm like, You could probably buy a luggage tag. Like, we didn't give you something you couldn't get, but that seems to be like a little wow, a personalized thing along the way. What are you learning? And what my point being, they're not cheap, but they're not terribly expensive. This isn't a $500 luggage tag, okay?
Yeah.
But often it's little things that turn the dial. So when you think about a wow experience, a live person picking up the phone, what are some other like things that you have learned really elevate it for a guest experience, customer experience?
Well, the first step is to map out each of the touch points so that you know every single touch along the way, and then understanding as well and actually writing down what is their emotional state. Are they curious? Are they a little fearful? Are they scared? And I think if
Oh,
you
wow.
understand emotionally where they are, then you're able to think, we'll say, how can we alleviate that emotion, or how can we maybe double down on that? So I think that's the first, when you map it out, and just having some fun with your team members is like, how can we make that a wow? And it's pretty incredible that, like for the church leaders, that get a group together and people love giving their opinions. And then, you measure it and test, as in, what kind of feedback that you get. And so we've learned quite a bit through the years. Now, the one thing that we learn, and this plays in really well with what you've done with personalizing, is that rather than putting Faris team on the gift, when you put their name on the gift, it's much more impactful. And so
We've learned that. Mm-hmm.
for our investors, when we close on a deal, we send out a Sonos speaker and we put their name on it. And it's like, oh my goodness, we had people that they were just like super happy. It's like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Like broker gifts, like we'll send that and we'll put their name on it. And so that's where I think that anytime you can personalize, now when you're dealing with massive amount of clients, or you got to have a process for this. And I think that's what makes it so rare, is that people know that you've personalized it. And so anytime you can tie it to something specific, like there's a book that you talked about, and you can personalize it and put a little note. I think it shows that you're listening as well. And so Giftology is a really good book. I think you've read that
Yeah.
as well,
Yeah.
right?
We've had John, unfortunately, he passed away very young, but we've had him on the podcast. We'll link to that in the show notes. Mark, let's talk about you reinventing yourself, from the guy knocking on doors, from 38 sales to how many houses will you sell now this year in Canada?
Well, so over 13,000. So we sell about $1 billion a year in real estate now.
Wow.
So I got to a point where, yeah, we're leading the team doing 1,000 sales, and I was doing 150 homes personally. So I was like on five
That's
listings.
that's every 3 days you're selling a house.
Well, what happened was we started hitting the ceiling.
Yeah.
And I was like, why on earth are we hitting the ceiling? We never had that problem before. We were always on massive growth mode. And I realized, you know what? I'm actually the lid right now. I started reading books, and I'm like, I'm the lid in the business. I need to transition out of being the operator and into figuring out what a CEO should be doing. So
Right.
there was about it, and this is when you actually got me onto scaling up, when you made that suggestion. But
I
during
remember the
that time,
conversation. Yeah.
I had two questions I wanted to answer. Number one, what's a scorecard of a CEO? Like, what are the main responsibilities, the tactical things that a CEO should do? And the other one was, why do companies hit ceilings, and how do you break through? And so that was like a 3-year time frame of getting into Jim Collins, building the whole leadership team out, and then in regards to scaling up in EOS traction, implementing a lot of level 10 meetings, daily huddles, and quarterly rocks and priorities, and all the rest of it. We implemented all of that, and then boom, Carey, like it was one step back to take two steps forward, because our profit initially for the first year to two, it dropped. And then what happened when I built that strong leadership team, then we went from 1,000 sales, we finally broke through. We got to 1,400 sales, and then we got to 1,700 sales. We did 1.4 billion in sales in a year. And that's when, right around that time, is when there was another shift that came. And so real estate investing became harder. Interest rates doubled. We ended up seeing that investment properties, you had to go way, way, way up north, not in our market anymore. You couldn't find any good cash flowing properties. And so that's when I really needed, there was a big problem because we had thousands of investors that we worked with through the years, and you could always come to us and we'd find you a great deal. But it was very hard in my marketplace, and rent control is another thing.
So this is post-COVID where everything went crazy in the housing market. I mean, it is
Right.
nuts. I mean, houses that cost $700,000 8 years ago cost $1.2 million today or more. So
That's right. And we
yeah.
had invested along the way, and so we were buying single family properties, smaller multifamily, and apartment and office buildings. And so there was a big problem that we had. And so what I ended up doing is I started looking outside of our market, and I started looking at places like Charleston and Tampa and these markets down south. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this reminds me a lot of 2008, 2009. And I thought, what about the larger stuff? What if we help our investors invest down in these markets and buy these 100-unit plus apartment buildings? What if we could get them access to these? We call them like the crown jewel of real estate, and compete against the Black Rocks and the big boys, right? What if we did? What if we could do that? And then I went back and all the key learnings that I got from scaling the real estate brokerage, we applied that. And that's when I partnered up with John McCarowitz. He's a very strong integrator, strong operations. He scaled that company up to over like 400 people, and they sold it. And so the reality here is that we built the team, and since then we've scaled that up. We have a full-time team of 9, and so we partner with investors now, and we buy these 100-unit apartment buildings. So I've had to change what my role is in the company. And I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of people will not take that step from, we'll say independent contractor to, oh, wait a sec, I need to learn a new skill set, CEO, to, oh, I need to learn a new marketplace in a, well, the commercial real estate. There's a learning curve. And that's where what I did was I fast tracked that learning by hiring the best people that have a track record on these assets. And so that helped me learn that a lot faster. And so that's where through the years, I think transitioning and learning as you go and then taking massive action, it's been a real good learning and say journey over the last like 5 years. So,
When you went from selling to becoming CEO, what was the hardest part of that journey for you?
so when I first started transitioning, I'm like, oh, I'll just keep this client and this client, or, I'll only take on certain listings. And so I started realizing that the split focus for me was not helpful. And so I was kind of I was CEO, but then I was doing this over here, and I just letting go completely and trusting my people. And so one of the things that I did that really helped with that transition is I spent a lot of time making sure that our sales reps were trained. And it wasn't like abdication where it's like, pass it off and hope the best. This was straight up, you need to role play with me, do the listing presentation, the buyer presentation, show me that you can do this. And so I spent a lot of time, I wrote down all the scripts and built the presentations out. So that really helped make that transition. That was probably the hardest thing though, letting go completely and
Mhm.
realizing that, what the selling side of it, I'm no longer taking that on because the company now needs me to be the best CEO and help scale the company from that point of view.
Maybe you don't miss anything now about your old role, but did you miss anything at the time? It's like, oh, I wish I could get back there out there on the street. A lot of leaders struggle with this, and I think you're right. It's a split focus. So that's why I'm asking. Like personally, there had to be a cost to that. I would imagine at some point because you were number one in the country.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
were good at it.
Yeah. Well, so the team, to me, it was like whether I was personally doing the sales or the team members were doing it, it was still under Faris team. So to me, whether I did it or they did it, it was the same sign, same everything. And so that was helpful to know that okay, we're the company needs me to do this role over here, but we're all still playing together. It's kind of like a partnership and your marriage. It's you take that, I take this, and we need to have the same result. And sometimes those we'll say those activities or those uh, uh, responsibilities they change within. But for me, that's where it was very helpful just to know that we set a goal and we were going after it together.
Mm. Yeah. And there, you talked about it before. You just need to park your ego at the door and do what's in the best interest of the mission, which I think can be challenging for a lot of
And
leaders.
that was that. I'll tell you, especially transitioning, going from the real estate where you walk into a room or any sort of award ceremony and you're getting that top award across the country, and then you're going into another industry and you're going to an event or a conference and you're telling these guys have 10,000 units. They own these real estate investment firms. It's like, I have 70 units, and you're kind of like, you're just like, they're like, oh, you're so cute, this little guy. Right? And I'm like, well, we
You're in
run a real
kindergarten
estate team
again.
up in Canada. They're like, oh, you're so cute, real estate up in Canada, eh? And so there is definite pride that I had to swallow on that and get back to the basics. And, for me, I think that at the heart of growth, I think, is going back there as much as possible into that, we'll call that rookie mindset framework. And it is. I had to swallow pride going through that as well. And it's an investment starting this real estate investment firm. I mean, we're hiring super high end, really skilled individuals, right? And everybody's coming under. So it's an upfront investment. So you got to be able to put the money out front as well. And you're gonna take a risk when you start any sort of new company. And I'll just say it's been a swallowing of pride, but massive amount of growth, and we're seeing a lot of fruit from it now. So
One of the things I've always admired about you in the time I've known you is few people focus more on goals and are active learners. Like when I gave you that Vern Harnish book or recommended it to you, I said to you before we hit record, I think I've skim read it and probably need to read it again. You've read it 3 times, have notes, underlined every other sentence, memorized it, implemented it. And you do that with, Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, or whatever you happen to be reading at any time. Can you talk about your learning habits and how they've informed your leadership?
So this is probably one of the most impactful things that I've done when people ask, like, how are you, able to accomplish this? And I do believe success is a number of small things. Alex Hormozy talks about it's like golden BBs versus a silver bullet. But from a learning ability, I'd say the number one thing that I've been able to do is that when I read a book, so I call it stack reading. So I buy the Audible version, and then I have the physical book and I have a pen. I'm more of a kinetic learner, so I need to write. And so I speed it up to like 1.5 to 1.7, and it pulls me through the book. Because whatever you want to learn, somebody wrote down their best ideas. I mean, Carey, you've wrote a number of phenomenal books that I've loved, that I've taken a lot of great content. At Your Best is one of my favorites. But the point there is that I'm going and I'm underlining, and it pulls me through the book so I can get through it faster. And then when I'm done, I go back through and I pull those main key concepts, ideas, I write on the back, and I look to action on it as fast as possible. The time frame from learning it to actioning on it, the shorter I can shrink that, the faster I can run. And so for me, whenever I'm learning anything, I'm more learning not for the sake of overall general learning. I'm more studying to learn a part of the business. And so for the listeners out there, I would say that whatever business you're in, there are people that have written down how to get better in certain areas that maybe you're weaker on or that you want to learn. The key is to not just read the book, because I would say out of most of the people I've spoken with, and when it comes down to reading, they'll read it and they'll read it once and they'll maybe skim. But the ability to take action and just 1 or 2 or 3 things from each book, the faster you can do that, the faster you can get ahead. And that's been probably my number one hack when it comes down to overall success, is learning in a stack reading framework, and then actioning on it as fast as possible. That's been huge for me.
I think your insight about what can I implement right now and let's shrink the gap between learning and execution is probably the biggest takeaway for me. I mean, it's super cool to like audiobook and read it and mark it up, but a lot of people have, Evernotes or notes
Right.
full of insights, but they haven't done anything with it. And, a friend of mine says action creates traction. I really believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. A high sense of urgency and taking massive action are, I would say, the two, like, they're the most important things when it comes down to business. And that's where somebody that is not educated, that just learns if you look at a flywheel, the ability to learn something, action on it, reflect from your learning, and then do it again in that flywheel concept, the faster you can do that, somebody that is maybe doesn't have a formal schooling education, they can go and blow by somebody very quickly that has an MBA because they're learning at a much faster pace than somebody that maybe has a background in overall learning, but they're not continuing with their learning curve. And the best way to learn is to take action. And even if you go to the one step further, and I know you're doing this now, Carey, and I know for me, anytime you can teach something that if you want to get really good at something, if you can teach it, it anchors it in at you, and you have to understand it at a much deeper level. And I found that was another thing that I started doing that really helped with my learning.
Um, One thing, because this pivot into real estate investing is 3 or 4 years old. It's not that old, where you became the CEO, founder of Faris Capital, et cetera. But you still have your whole real estate company running north of the border. So you and Joanna moved to Naples. You're there in Florida most of the time now. You come back to Canada for a few weeks a year in different events. What was it like to learn to lead your real estate company remotely? What personal shifts did you have? Because you're not there every day. I mean, your team is still high performing, but that's a big pivot. A lot of multi-site campus pastors, like senior pastors, can't make. It's like, I wish I could be at all the sites. I want to see what's going on. Or business leaders, if you get into franchising or multiple locations, it's really hard. But you got two different businesses going on, not just two locations. So what were the pivots you had to make as a leader to be able to do that effectively?
Yeah. Well, the first, we'll say, concern that came up when the thought came of, well, maybe we can move down, go down to Florida sooner than when the kids get out of high school, which is like 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
So this is where first there was this mindset of, well, what will people think? What will people say? And so there was a fear there. And I just reflected and said, you know what? Like, I know that I can do my job just as well remotely than in person. And the other thing that was really important at that point as well is that we had built a strong leadership team and strong managers. So we do have people boots on the ground as well. And so for me, it was getting very clear, what kind of value do I add to the business and where are the key points in that I need to be inserted in. And so that's where, over a period of 2 years, as I was starting to build Faris Capital, anytime you start a new business, you got to be like full on. And so for that 2 year time frame when I got Faris Capital off the ground, when I was building that and I was boots on the ground going, the president, I'd have my once a week meeting with my president. And then we had a strong leadership team that were meeting outside. I wasn't part of that actually for a period of 2 years. And so now that we built up Faris Capital, I'm able to spend a little bit more time in that business, leading the sales team and whatnot, while doing the Faris Capital side, because we have a strong president on that side. So for me, the number one thing when it came down to doing remotely is making sure that we have strong leadership in place and that they're in the right rhythms, in their meeting rhythms and how they're meeting and setting their priorities. And so that skill set really needed to be built before making that transition. And the other part of it was overcoming these limiting beliefs of, what will people think, what will people say. I think it's getting very clear what kind of value you do add to the company, and just continue to make sure that you're doing that. And for example, you're reaching out to all of the key players, and you're keeping that relationship strong rather than just being completely unplugging and we'll say ignoring them.
One thing, and I mean, you're a strong Christian. You've been part of our church for over 10 years now, et cetera. So I know you well. But visualization, I remember when you were poised to become top in the country, you talked about visualizing the award on the wall. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
can you talk about that power? Because I think a lot of leaders are afraid to step into the future because they can't see the future. And I've tried to do a better job at praying, visualizing. And I know you're not getting into like new age woo woo stuff, but talk about the power that that's had for you.
Yes. So I call it visioning. And so visioning to
Mm,
me is I mean, it's right there in the Bible. The people lack vision, they perish.
yeah.
And so for me, it's getting very clear what the result is that you're looking for. And so when you can get very clear what it is you're looking for, your mind goes about finding it. And we've all experienced this when we go and buy a new vehicle. When
Right.
you buy a vehicle, it's like you start seeing it everywhere because it's top of mind. And so one of the biggest things I see when I'm talking with maybe a new entrepreneur, I'm like, okay, what are your goals? What does that look like? And the more I ask questions, the more they start to paint in more colors. And
Mm,
so this is something that when I started in real estate, I remember I was working late and I had a real estate agent knock on the door and come in and she opened the door and she's like, Mark, you pretending to work in there? I'm like, no, no, I just, make my calls. And then they ended up leaving. And then I was just me there in the office. And I went to the front reception. And as I was leaving, this is well after 9 o'clock, I saw these awards up on the wall. And I thought to myself, the awards were the top 1% in the
mm,
entire company. And this is when we were like maxed out our credit cards. I was like, what if, what if I could be up there? Like, that's amazing. That would be great. And so when I started really diving in, that question was really powerful. What if? What if I could do that? And then it was like, why not? Why couldn't I do that?
mm,
And then the more that I started getting clarity on that, I started getting, okay, well, what would that look like if I did win it? And then, going up on stage, getting the award and feeling all those feelings. And it was just like for me, that was encouraging, that thought of that, and that visioning. I created it so clear in my mind that, Carey, like I knew what I was eating for dinner that night, and going up on stage and feeling all those emotions. And so that to me is creating that kind of clarity. It gives your daily actions a lot more intention because you know what you're trying to do. And I think that the more you can create clarity in regards to whatever result is that you're going for, your mind's going to see more opportunities, and that's just a fact that that is has been proven over and over. Is like with you, when you have a goal and you start working towards it, more things start to show up, and they were there before, you just didn't see it. And I think that's
mm.
the biggest thing.
I've had that actually when you mention it. I thought I didn't do that particularly well. I've had that with certain guests where you're intimidated to even send the email because you don't know them and, they don't do interviews, etc. And then you kind of work yourself into it. I pray through it as I know you do. And then
Yeah.
when eventually we're either in the room or online like this, there's a familiarity and an inevitability to it where you're like, yeah, this is exactly what I should be doing. I should be interviewing this person. And it's a really interesting episode or a really interesting exercise to go through. Okay,
Yeah.
bit of a rapid fire round. You and your wife, Joanna, have worked together for years, and I'm sure you've had high points and low points. What have been some of the keys to making that
Mhm.
relationship work?
So, Carrie, when we first got married, whenever I got something wrong in the marriage, I'd say something or I'd do something, and I knew I was offside. It would take me maybe it'd take me a month or 3 weeks before I would like own up to it.
Wow.
And then as years went by, eventually I learned, Carrie. I'm not the super quick learner here, and then it got to be weeks, and then week, and then a few days, and then a few hours. And now as I've matured more, that ability to be able to ask for forgiveness
Mm,
sooner has been like huge for us.
yeah.
And so that's a big one because if you keep on holding the angst, or we'll say you're pissed off or something and you don't ask for forgiveness, then the walls start to build. And so we pull those walls down very quickly. The other thing for Joanna and I is that there's alignment. I mean, we both believe in Jesus Christ. So like
Mhm.
the Bible for us is like a really great filter of, we'll call it the foundation of the marriage. And so when we both believe in that, our values are very much aligned. And so that's the other one. And then I'd say as a third, that we've always made it very clear to the kids that Joanna and I, like, okay, first Jesus, he's number one, and then it's mom and dad. We're next.
Mhm.
Like mom is, she's, I'm gonna pick. So if you're in a debate with your mom, I'm on mom's side. And so this is a big one that we spend a lot of time making sure that we're connecting through the week. I mean, running these companies, it's very taxing in regards to time. And so outside of that, like we're getting our time in one-on-one along the way. That's always been big because Joanna's her love language is quality time. And so,
Tony's too.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Like,
I got to make sure to fill that cup. And if it's getting a little empty, Joanna's very, again, she's Polish, right? She's very bold, and she'll tell me straight. She's like, Mark, we got to spend some more time here. I'm like, okay, I got you. Yeah. So
you
that's
know,
been good too.
you guys
Yeah.
are good at that too. You've always done vacations together with and without the kids.
Mm.
And when our kids were younger, you're in the thick of it. Are they all teenagers now, the boys?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Matthew, 17, 15, and almost 13 now.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought they were all teens. So you're in the middle of it right now. And, you know, I've seen you. You'll take Joanna for the weekend, for a week, make sure the boys are taken care of, etc. That probably is another key to maintaining a healthy relationship and making sure that you've got a strong marriage.
Well, and the other thing that we've done as well is we'll actually take a part of the day on Thursday. Like Thursday just seems to be that time, and we'll go for lunch, maybe we'll go for a walk on the beach. And that's been like really good. That's the rule. So there's exceptions to the rule in regards to if there's something I'm on travel or whatnot. But overall, we make sure that we get that Thursday in. And so that, Carrie, that's been so helpful in regards to just reconnecting. But once we get through the reconnecting side of it, sometimes there's like business conversations that I'll throw out ideas and we kind of bat it out back and forth. And there's been more kind of moments for me where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's really good. We kind of work out an idea or a concept. And so that's been actually really good on the business front as well, along, amongst all the other benefits.
So, note to leaders who are really busy, Mark runs two massive organizations that are leaders in their field, and he spends Thursday afternoon with his wife. That's Friday for Tony and I. If Mark can do it, we can do it, right? Just a note. Okay. One of and we don't have a lot of time to really explore it, and maybe we can do a round two on this sometime. But do you want to talk about that first time we met? You came to Connexus, you were looking for a different church, and we did something that really kind of upset you and Joanna that Sunday, and you talked to me about it. Do you remember what we're talking about?
Yeah. So, yeah. And just before I do, I'm just going to go back quickly in regards to this. There's this rule of Parkinson's law. And so, going back to this idea that about time, that if you
Yeah.
give yourself an hour to do something, you can get it done in an hour. Just like if you go on vacation, you can become superhuman and you can get way more done. If you have certain windows of time that you have to get your work done, Parkinson's law says that you'll be able to squish in and fit the amount of work into any time that you give it. And so if you give yourself a day to do the work, you'll get it done in a day. And if you have a half a day, then that's how you actually create and build time. So that's just more of a side note.
Yeah, it's like work expands to the time available to fill it, so make
That's right.
less time available.
100%.
Okay, so I still remember, I know where I was standing when I met you because I knew who you were, but I didn't know you personally. And I thought, ooh, the Farises are at church this Sunday. And every pastor has probably had that experience. And you were like, I'm not sure about your church, Carey. Can you tell me more? You were very respectful, but do you remember that conversation?
Yes, I do. And so it was great because you were open to the conversation. I think there was something that had come up.
We were still doing covers at the time. I think we played Magic. The band played Magic by Coldplay. This dates it to 2014. Do you remember that?
There was something that happened where we were kind of questioning it. And so we came and talked to you about it. And, being in a leadership position for me, it's like I always want to be able to have a conversation if maybe we, overstepped or, or something came across a certain way, just to get context.
Mm.
And so you were available after church and we came up and spoke with you and you said, you know what, like it was cool for me to hear you like, listen, we don't always get it right.
Mm.
And it was, you didn't say, it wasn't like this, oh, we did everything wrong. It was very much like, listen, we don't, we don't get it right all the time. And so like there was a humility there, but then you were really listening to us. And I think that conversation of like truly listening and giving some context as to what was said or the cover that was playing at that time, but that started a good relationship as, oh, you know what, this is somebody there that I actually respect, and we can have a conversation, and that was kind of the beginning of the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember that. And you were very kind too. You're just like, so why are you doing a song called Magic if it's a
Yeah,
Christian church? And
yeah.
I'm like, actually, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
So
it's cool. It's cool to hear. I mean, there's at that point, I think you had well over 1,000
yeah,
going, right? And so
yeah.
you had the time of having that one-on-one, which was cool.
I
And
always tried to be at the door,
yeah,
even, as long as I was lead pastor, teaching pastor. I always wanted to be at the door. I always wanted to meet as many people as I could on a Sunday. I think that's really
yeah,
important. Um, what do church leaders not understand about business leaders?
yeah. So first, I think that growing a church, the same principles apply to
Mhm.
growing any business. And so one of the things that I've seen, because I've been to a number of different churches in the past, is that as an entrepreneur, you have to. I believe there's an element of paranoia that is important, but there's optimism is, I would say, even more so. And so with the message for entrepreneurs that are coming in, when if it's based in negativity, the entrepreneur will pick up on that. And
Mm,
versus like so I'm a being a believer,
interesting.
being a believer in Jesus Christ, I believe that he died on the cross, he took our sins away, and because he came and took my sins away, I'm now perfect in God's eyes because of Jesus Christ. So I sit on that side of it. And so that's where optimism, if the message is like, listen, we're 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 victorious now, coming from that message
Mm.
versus like negativity, you're a sinner, you're horrible. Entrepreneurs, they'll pick up on that, and they know that I'm just saying in my own experience anyways, from an entrepreneurial side of it, that's not something that I want to expose myself to every day. If you miss the back half of that message, that listen, we're victorious now, because as a CEO and entrepreneur, you have to have a certain element of, listen, like we're going on the sacred mission, we're going somewhere big, and this is a beautiful thing. And so I've seen that before, where it went the other way, and it just wasn't super appealing for me, because I know with any sort of growth in entrepreneurialism that the you have to have that we're going to do it and mindset versus the negative side of it.
What do you wish business leaders understood more about church leaders or misunderstand about church leaders? I mean, we've had a pretty good friendship over the years, so I think we know each other well, but just
Yeah.
generally speaking, what do you wish you knew that business leaders knew more about church leaders?
Yeah. Well, I think that, I mean, the personality types that you've explained to me through the years, I think that's probably one of the biggest ahas.
Oh, the whole Enneagram thing?
Well, when I say personality profiles, that when you have a church, you have different, we'll say, demographics. You have people that have been
Oh
there
yeah. Yeah,
for,
yeah. Like
you
I've
know,
told you many times, we're trying to reach everyone in the city, but we're not for everyone.
that's right. And so
Yeah.
to be able to, grow a church, and I mean, it's very similar, I guess, in a sense in business, is that you got to be very clear of what your message is and stick with it. And so that's tough when you have maybe somebody that's been going to that church for, we'll say, decades. And you got to be okay with like, here's the message, here's where we're going, this is important. And they might not resonate with that, and that's tough. I mean, this is, and you're dealing it's not just business, you're dealing with Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
and so like that becomes more of a question of do I believe that I'm following Jesus's path, that the direction that you've been giving as the church. But some of the stories that you've had to go through, I think, was really insightful. And the other thing as well is the fact that there's a lot that's requested and asked of you. So being able to put up uh, proper guardrails for yourself as a pastor, because burnout is a real thing as a pastor. And I know you talk a lot about that as well. And I think as an entrepreneur, it's easy to see a pastor up there, oh, once a week, oh, that's all nice. But you guys go through a lot through the week. And it's just, that's phenomenal to know that, to have that insight anyways, that it's not just a one day job, it's like an everyday job, and you have a lot of people reaching out for you for many different situations.
Just to add nuance to that, I think what I would tell you and Joanna, when you were trying to figure out, is this the church for us? It was like, look, there's a lot of churches in this area. We play this particular role in the kingdom of God. We're not the kingdom of God. And this church is going to work better if you're inviting friends. Like if you're just here to consume, we'll be okay. There are other churches that might be better. But if you have friends who are close to you or family members that you want to invite to church who maybe don't go to church, this is going to be a great church for you. And you guys were like super inviters when you lived in the Barrie area. Super cool. Yeah.
Joanna will say if she likes something, just watch out. She'll make sure she gets all of her friends there, and I kind of jump onto that bandwagon, so to speak. But it's been great, and anybody that we've invited through the years, they've always had a good experience, and come to Jesus as well. There's a number of people, so
pretty cool.
You guys have done a great job there.
Thank you. Well, we've covered a lot. Is there anything in our last couple of minutes we didn't touch on that you want to touch on, Mark?
Yeah, Carey, I'd just say overall, the biggest thing when it comes down to, I'd say, growth overall for, say, church leaders, is number one is surround yourself with the best people and strong leadership. And so if somebody is like a B or C on the team, one of the biggest things that I've seen is when I've transitioned them off, and as hard as it was, is one of the hardest things as any sort of leader is to transition them off, is that I've never regretted that.
Yeah.
And so it's always been an uplift to me personally and to our organization. So when I leveled up the bar of the type of people that were coming, and the skill sets that they bring to the table and their ability, when I leveled that up, the company grew. And so I would say that was probably one of the biggest, we'll say, insights that I got through the years. And I think for all the listeners out there, that applies even if you aren't leading anyone else, your personal sphere as well. Whoever you hang around with, you tend to gravitate to them. So if you want to just level up your life, you get people that are further down the road and you start hanging around with them, and you will gravitate and drift that way.
You know what? That's a real challenge for a lot of leaders. We're very loyal. And so we hang on to perhaps the B and C players on the team a little bit too long.
Well, the good news here, Carey, is that you even have courses on that, on how to
we do.
So go check out Carey's, Carey, here's a little blurb for you. Go check out Carey's website when he has training on how to do that and say no without, being offensive in any way. And so you have some really great stuff out there as well.
Thanks. We'll link to your companies in the show notes and everything. But if people want to track with you, what do you want to direct them to? Your social, your podcast, dude? I love your podcast.
Yeah. So we have one that's geared towards real estate agents, one entrepreneurs, and the multifamily investor playbook. Actually, that one is really great. We have 2 conversations a week, John and my business partner, John, and myself, where we talk about how we're taking down these larger 100-unit apartment buildings, all the challenges we're having through taking them down, and how we're able to navigate that. So multifamily investor playbook, we're on YouTube. And we're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. So you can check us out there.
Cool. Well, Mark, thank you so much. Looking forward to hanging out again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Carey. It was a pleasure.